Right, firstly, sorry that it's late this month. I've been so busy this month. I don't know if you know or don't know, but I'm launching what they call a Patreon channel. It's like a pay-as-you-go version or section to my YouTube, and it's along the lines of what I did in the lockdown when I read through the whole of An Obsession with Carp. And putting all the stories I've missed out and everything else. Well, basically I'm doing that again with a flick of the tail and then on to Fine Lines with loads of other content, and it's on a separate sort of, it's £5 a month, and it's a separate thing. And anyway, I'm launching that on Saturday, this may be out by then. Anyway, the 1st of August is when it's being launched, so I have been absolutely rammed out, floundering around in a world I don't understand really. I'd never even heard of Patreon or Patreon before a few weeks ago, so that's why this is late. And also I've been sort of dodging home jobs as well. It's weird working from home. When you work from home, it's almost like you're available, you know, but you're not. This is where I work. But sometimes her indoors thinks, oh, he's at home, I'll get him to do such and such. So I had to have a day clearing out the garage below where I am now. And she even suggested, right, that I clear out my office. I've no idea what she's talking about. It's not even like it's a mess. Well, I suppose it is a bit of a mess. Well, actually, I suppose it's quite a lot of a mess. But as I keep saying to her, I say creativity is born out of chaos. That's right, isn't it? That's the way I look at it anyway. That's my excuse. But anyway, I haven't cleared up the office, as you can see. I hadn't cleared up my tackle box until just now, as you will see. But here we are. We're up here at last. I did clear out the garage. And off we go. So, look back at this month. What's it been like? Started off brilliantly. May have tailed off a little bit towards the end of the month, but that's fishing, isn't it? I mean, you know, it's summer. It's hot. It's hot today. It's hot up here, I can tell you. It's not really the best time for angling, but there's always a bite to be had, isn't there? You know, if you play your cards right. And at the beginning of the month, like I say, I had a blinding session, to be honest. I'd gone down there in a massive southwesterly wind. It was perfect. The pressure just plummeted, and there was this huge sort of main southwesterly that was howling down the lake into the car park area. And I went in the swim that was facing into it, and this swim had done 3 fish in the 24 hours previous. The guy was just packing up. I couldn't believe it. I was like, I hate following people in, but I thought I'd be mad not to, so I've gone straight in after him. I even pulled the proper stroke. He was like loaded up all his stuff, and all he had to do was boat out into these waves to get his markers, like canes. And I said to him, oh, don't worry about that, mate. I said, when I go out and do my rigs, I'll grab your canes for and leave them under your boat. So, you know, I know exactly where you've been fishing as well. So I fished one where he'd been fishing, and I found 2 other marks for my other 2 rods, put a load of bait out, got it all perfect. It was obscene, the conditions. It was 100% I was going to catch. By about midday the next day, I hadn't had a single beep, well, apart from the wind and the weed, and I just thought, something's happened here. You know, they've moved, and then I started seeing them. And I suppose you could say they were on the back of the wind. But the way the lake is, it's got a chain of 3 islands, and the car park end is inside the first island and the car park, so it's like a small lake of its own. So the lake's split up into areas like that. You've got the big bit of lake at the back, you've got this medium bit by the car park, a small bit round to the right. So they had gone on the back of the wind, but they hadn't gone on the back of the wind. They'd just gone the other side of this smaller section I was fishing. So from me, they're only 180 yards away, something like that, maybe a tiny bit more. But on into the swim on the end of the island that I was looking straight into, so facing back, and I started seeing them show there, and I started seeing them show really close in. I just thought, sod the weather, they're there, you know. Threw everything in the boat, made my way over there. As soon as I got there, I saw one, and I just thought, oh, this is the one. Now we're on them. You know, it's one thing being on conditions. It's a totally different thing being on fish. Also, by this stage now, I've started to realise the habits of the carp, especially their showing habits. Now, if they show in the day, that's a really good sign. You know, you might see 1 or 2 in the day, see a few early morning, and think, yeah, they're showing all right. The odd one in the evening, and think, yeah, I've seen 6 fish, I've seen 7 fish. You know, I'm on them. But if you can get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, sort of between midnight and 2:30 in the morning, 12:30 till 2:30, that period, if they're showing in the day, then they're going spanners in the night, proper showing. Problem is, I like to be up at 4 o'clock in the morning, 4:15 as it gets light. I don't leave a lot of time for sleep. You know, I try to get to sleep as early as I possibly can in the evening. I've tried to sleep in the day, but the dog won't let me. As soon as I go to sleep, she starts clawing me and whining at me, thinks I've forgotten to feed her. Or a plane goes over, or someone comes around to visit. That's the usual one. But if you can get up, you know, in the summer, middle of the night, early hours of the morning, like proper early, that's when carp like to show. And I was woken up about midnight by the first one in this new swim, and it was only 8 yards, 10 yards away or whatever. Big, sounded like a big fish, big old slow slop out, and then another one, and then there was a couple around the corner, and I was fishing like one close where the first fish had showed. I was fishing one round the corner because that's where I'd seen one earlier on. It was like there's like a channel around the corner of the island, just a little underarm, and I had one down there, and I had one out on a little feature in front. So I was well placed with all my baits, and they started showing and showing. I couldn't sleep. I just literally couldn't sleep. I thought it's going to go any minute, any minute, any minute it's going to go. And somehow it lasted till just before light, I suppose it was. Well, it was dark, but not long off, just that sort of purpley sky time. And the left-hand rod has just melted off. It was on the end of there's a pontoon, like a little floating jetty there. Which is a nightmare. As soon as you stand on it, it's not going to drift away, it's tied down, but it wobbles up and down all over the place, and I sort of wobbled my way down there and hooked into this fish, stood on the end of the jetty and played it. And at first I thought it wasn't a very big one, wasn't doing an awful lot, and then it rolled like in the darkness, and there's a different sound, isn't there, to a big fish. It's that vacuum of water that goes in, that sort of as it all pours back in. As soon as it rolled, I thought, oh, this is a good one. And then it made its way round into a little bay to my left, and just pinged off of one snag. I just felt it, so I tightened right down, got him back out, and most of it was under my feet. You know, big heavy boils and thumping about. Anyway, he's come up, and I've got my head torch on low now, and he's slid into the net, and I've seen this big leathery side of what is obviously quite a considerable carp, and I'm just like, yes, this has got to be the biggest one I've had out of there so far. As it turned out, it was. So I secured him in the net. I've always got at least a couple of landing nets with me. Put him on the end of the jetty, sort of tied it down so it was thin, because I only had about, I don't know, I reckoned about less than an hour to wait till it was like proper photography light. Put the other net up, and I've got a cane out there. Now on the top of my canes, I use, it's a reflective tape, similar to what you get on bands on like kids, you know, school coats and stuff. Those little white and grey sort of diamonds. It is mega reflective. And these canes I use are like bamboo canes. It's actually dowel with a line down the side that's adjustable on a clip, and then a big lead on the bottom, so if a fish goes through it, it knocks the cane over and the cane stands back up, so you know you don't get tangled in it. It's much better than them H blocks and all that rubbish. But the beauty of these is anything up to maybe even 80 yards if you've got a decent head torch. As soon as you flick the torch on where they are, woof, this reflective tape, it's only an inch of it, it's proper shiny. So I flick the head torch on, put on a fresh bait, and I see it land right next to the cane, lifted, dropped, donk, right on top of where I'd put all this sort of particle chop boilies and whole boilies. Put the rod back in the rest, sat back down on the chair, put the kettle on. As I did, one's come up. I can see the cane by now, it's getting proper light. Right on it, right smack bang on top of where I've just cast. And about 2 minutes later, another one, slightly smaller one's come up, bosh, right on it. Then I've heard one round the corner, and I just thought, 100% that rod's going again, and probably that rod as well. I hadn't seen a lot out for the third rod, but didn't care. So anyway, a little while went past. I phoned Mozzer, he was further up on the island, and he's come down, and we've weighed and photographed and videoed the fish, which was a fish, you know, a proper target. It's a fish called the leather because it is very leathery. Hadn't been out for 2.5 years, and apparently in its past it's done 6 or 7 years between. It's a real rare one, this fish. So I was absolutely over the moon with him. But all the time, even when I'm, you know, videoing it and photographing it and sliding, I'm just thinking that rod's still going to go. I can still hear fish out there, you know. I'm more concentrated on what I've got on the bank, but I can still hear them out there.
Good morning. Good morning, Britain. 39.5 pound leather, which we believe is the leather, strangely enough. And he's a corker. Look at that for a brute, eh? Oh, we like carp fishing. Now, I ain't moaning, but I am surprised I only had one, because they were showing like mad, but there's still loads of time for another one. But this'll do for me. Hello, mate. His carp two halves is completely two-tone on this side, but you'll see it his best side. He is beautiful. So nice to be holding a proper one. Backache special. He's lush.
Got to about 9 o'clock and eventually the right hand one in the channel bent right round, and I had another fish on that one, 20 pound, didn't weigh him, 20 pound common, something like that. Anyway, I'm proper confused why this left hand rod hasn't gone again. It's the prime spot. It had the most fish of everywhere was showing right, not close, not near it, but on top of it. I knew they were down there, absolutely trashing that spot. Eventually, when everything died down and, you know, the fish stopped showing, it got hot, and I thought, oh, it's all over. I wound in that rod. I couldn't believe it. I wound it in. As soon as I swung it to hand, I just thought, you muppet. The boilie was perfectly embedded on the hook point, or the hook point was embedded into the boilie. That could have been picked up 100 times. I wouldn't have known anything about it. You know, nothing more than maybe a beep if they were really determined. But there was no way you could have fished. The hook point was actually in the bait. And it wasn't the only time it had happened in this short period. So I sat there scratching my head thinking, this doesn't usually happen. Why? You know, why has this suddenly started happening? And the difference, I was using a bottom bait. Now, you know, I say every day's a school day. It is. There's always something you can learn. I've used bottom baits for years, but when I used to use bottom baits, longer hairs, they sink differently to a wafter. I've been on wafters for a long time, up until quite recently. It was tragic, absolutely tragic. And when I realised why, it was so simple, schoolboy error. And I'm going to show you exactly, you know, the mechanics of that rig. Simple rig, but simple to get right.
Before I show you what I'm talking about with the rig, I thought I'd tie one up, save you sitting there watching me tie up a rig. So, sat at my office chair, I opened up my tackle box. Let's just grab something, shall we? Let's just grab anything. Let's grab one piece of line. Do you think that possibly my tackle box might need a clear out? It is just an absolute bomb site. Right, we'll do that first and I'll show you the rig in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, who'd have thought it? Just those tiny little details that you can just overlook after all those years. And the difference was just a bottom bait. I mean, it took me ages to suss it out. I had it out a couple of times. And the difference is literally just a bottom bait over a wafter. Nearly tidied, nearly cleaned out. It's not bad, is it? Look, better than it was. Still got a way to go. But so what was happening? Because a bottom bait, obviously, is a lot heavier than a wafter, and it actually sinks completely different on the cast and on the drop. If you're just dropping it from a boat, works the same way with whatever. Should have brought my glasses with me, shouldn't I? Right, we won't put a hair stop in there, but we'll put it at the right distance for one. So there, you've got your normal standard sort of length of hair. Now with a wafter, that's perfect, you know, because the wafter sink, the hook sink is the heaviest part. And I use these little tungsten PV products make them, these little tungsten liner liners, which that, you know, just a hook and a tungsten on a wafter is perfect, and it goes down slowly. And it's always going down at that angle, which is perfect. But with a bottom bait actually falls in quicker, a lot quicker, tumbles. And what that can do is that can spin round, and on the way down, with a nice sharp hook, you can stab the boilie. Often. You know, really, really easily. And that's exactly what I had. You know, I wound in after being on those fish, good fish as well, boshing on that spot. It was only, you know, a flick. I was deadly accurate. Catapult baits round it. I'd already got a big bed of particle out there, the nut mix. You know, I'd had the one big and the leather, but he hadn't eaten everything. So rather than have to boat out and disturb them, I'd just fire a few baits out, plop straight on top of me bed of mixed bait. And I was fishing like that, and I had it again. I've had that twice now, and the fix was so simple. Either use a wafter or just change the rig a tiny bit, just a minute little bit, and extend the hair. I mean, back in the day when I used to use bottom baits all the time, we'd always use long hairs. You know, you think of a hair rig, what an actual hair rig is. Way back, they were massive. They were inches long, you know, some inches long. But the difference with that, with a hair like that, is if it goes around the hook, it goes around the hook. And it's still a hair rig. It don't make no difference. It can go around a couple of times. That's round there twice. It's still a hair rig. It's still fishing. It's still clear. You know, you've still got that clearance. But with the shorter one, as it goes round, it's going round and round and round and making it ridiculously short now, so that's not the one. So when you start off, you're like that, you've got that error, look. You know, you've got that margin of error there. And that'll always fish. And just those fine lines, you know, those little tiny details. And I think that cost me a fish that morning, without a doubt. Because the algae is so bad on the lake this year, what had happened, the weed had started to grow quite well. Of course we had lockdown, didn't we? So I never got to fish it in April and May. I missed the clubbing months. The weed had started to grow okay, and then the algae came and the weed stopped growing, and then worse than that, the weed died. So a lot of the weed went to black and just hit the bottom. As such, there's one area, shallows, which has got weed, but the rest of the lake hasn't really got an awful lot. So there's nothing to hold them. So they're very easy to move on, these fish. And I stayed the extra night in this swim, like it was my third night of the session, and I got the impression that they'd done the off, you know. Quite often that's the way. You might catch two or three, you know, from any lake, two or three of the also rans, if you like, the average or below average or whatever, and then you get one big one like the leather was, and that sort of signals the end of it. And I got that impression. I stayed up the next night, or got up in the middle of the night, and only heard a couple of fish. It was a totally different game. I did catch one. I did have another one in the morning. Sort of scrape a 20 again. But yeah, I felt I'd had the best of it, but I'd also missed the best of it with the bloody rig being tangled. But you know, you can't get it right all the time. I'd had a blinding fish. I'm still over the moon with it, to be honest. You know, I look at the photo and just think, yeah, you're a proper one. But you know, maybe there could have been more. Who knows what else was with him? The fish I was hearing jump were big fish. And they were on the bait. I mean, when I got the net out, like I say, the leather had sat in there for a short period of time. I was waiting for the light, and it was full of maize. So just the shell, the outer bit, and hemp shells, and a black sort of dark sludge, which I assume, I'm using a fish meal boilie, was my bait. Yeah, it had been on it, and I'm sure his mates was on it as well. So yeah, probably missed out on another one, but you know, still happy with what I caught. Following week, I was obviously really still interested in that sort of rough area. You can't help it, can you? You've been somewhere, you've been in a swim, you've had a result. It wasn't a swim I'd fished before, so yeah, it's probably not the best angling in the world to go straight back. But I thought I'd do my first night in there, because again, like I said, they're showing at night, so I couldn't write it off in the day just by looking at it. So I did that first night in there, and I did catch one at first light on that same left-hand rod, another 21 pounds I think it was, common. But again, I just thought there wasn't the bulk of fish there, and I'm there for a particular fish. I'm there for a fish that might go 60 pound. You know, he's a big old leathery mirror. And I don't think he's hanging around with them tiddlers. So, you know, rather than just fish for a bite here and there, I was quite conscious I should be trying to find a group of bigger fish and hope he was amongst them. So I packed it all up and moved off. Actually, as it happens, I only move around the corner. There's a swim that, I said there's a channel around the side of the island there, where there's a swim that fishes in that channel. And it had been shut throughout the lockdown because it was very close to the swim I'd been fishing, but it had just opened. Unfortunately, it had opened at a weekend. I wanted to be first in there. Everybody wanted to be first in there. The guy that was first in there, I think he had 3 fish, but I got in there anyway. I thought it's probably had a bit of a shock. This would have been Tuesday. I think the guy left on the Sunday, and I went in there and I got everything really how I wanted it, and I started to see fish in the evening there, and everything looked absolutely prime. First light came and I just thought, I should have had a bite by now really. Got round to about second light, which is about like 7 o'clock, and all of a sudden one of my rods said, "What did you hear?" And I've looked out and there's a huge swirl where my line hits the water. A load of weed had gathered on it, and then again, and I just thought, they're spawning, you know. And the more I looked, the more I thought they're spawning. So I brought the lines in, looked out like the weedier part of the lake, and sure enough they were charging about out there the 4th time, which is a bit of a blow. But then it depends how you look at it. You know, they're not the same fish. I know they're not the same fish. You know, I speak to people who know a lot more about the biology of carp than I do, and they tend to agree with me that when you get this, you know, repeated spawning, it's not that group of fish spawning over. It's quite often strains, age groups, size, you know, maybe, you know, all the stockies, if you like, they'll all spawn first in such and such an area, and maybe the sort of in-betweens as a group of, I don't know, Suttons or Dinks or whatever, will spawn next over there, and the big ones still hold back, and then they spawn up there, and then you get some latecomers that haven't spawned at all. So I don't think it's the same fish spawning. I just think it's, you know, it's unfortunate they don't all spawn together and get it over with, to be honest, because what happens up on this particular lake is any areas that have seen any sign of spawning at all, they shut those swims for a week. So you can still fish, but way away from the fish that are actively spawning. You can fish at the other end of the lake, for example, for fish that aren't anything to do with it, which is, I think, is a good rule, to be honest. But it meant I had to leave that swim, so I just thought I'd still have the night, but I thought, no, I'll go home and do a bit more, come up here, do a bit more filming, get ready for the launch of the channel, and sort of put my time to good use and go back when it's all over, which is exactly what I did. Like I said, the water's been green, but really green all year on there. But when I got back the following week, an amazing thing had happened. It had just started to clear. I went out in the boat, and standing up in the boat with Polaroids on, I could see 7 feet. But whereas before you couldn't even see 7 inches, like only a week earlier. Which was proper exciting, you know. I thought, oh, this is the one. I can suddenly see, and I've gone round, and you know, the top of the humps, the shallower, the marginal shelves, and all of the shallows, and the weed that's in the shallows. I could see the lot, and I could see carp as well. I went along the front of some snags on a swim that was shut but due to open that day, and 3 quite big fish, a common and 2 mirrors. They came out of the snag as I went past to have a look at me, and then went back in. And I thought, I know where I'm going. So, but I'm not very patient. So I waited for that swim to open. It had to go up the sort of chain of command, if you like. And I waited and waited, and I thought, you know, the day's ticking by. I could be doing other stuff. I'm just waiting for a swim to open, and I lost patience in the end, and I thought I'd go for a boat right round the lake. So I went right up the far end, and as soon as I got up there I thought, this looks good. The wind, which had been south and southwest and west for ages, was actually going the other way. It was probably a northerly, almost a northeasterly, which is like, you know, anything with east is in the summer is my favourite wind. In the winter it's the kiss of death, but in the summer it's a good wind, north and northeast, because it's rare, you know. And it was blowing up there. It's probably only like 5, 6, 7 mile an hour, but when it's coming over 300-400 yards of water, open water, that gets quite a momentum, you know. It's quite a nice silver ripple coming in, and every now and then a gust had come in and a little, you know, proper wave had come past you. And there's some snag, like this is at the third island, so it's right at the end, and then against the far bank, or on the far bank, there's a load of snags. And in the last swim, the furthest swim on this third island, the last island, you've got the swim and you've got a small little annex, just an alleyway just right there to your right, to fish these snags. And as I looked through, you know, the boughs of the trees on the snags, with the fallen trees, were like bending in this wind. I thought, that's strengthening. And then one's come out right there, right in front of me. It's nothing, you know, it's a flick. And then another one. And I thought, oh my God, you know, I've found them. You know, it didn't look like big fish, but whatever, there could have been big fish down there. I didn't want to spook them. I was really conscious of not spooking them. I didn't want to just cast, because I wasn't sure how far out the snags came or whatever, and I knew there was some visibility, like I say. So I just drifted as close as I dared, like with the Polaroids, looking down, and then thought, you know, that there's nothing in the way there, you know, that snag finishes there, came off a bit of rod length, flicked it out. It's quite deep and really soft, but I'd seen a fish jump there. You know, handful of boilies round it, 3 scoops of the old nut mix, came back, rodding the rest. Thought I'd just leave just that one rod there, that'll do. Put the other 2 out in front. Anyway, throughout the day I must have seen 30 shows along these snags, so I ended up with 2 rods round. I'd done the same with the second rod, just went out to a different snag, came back a rod length, again, deep, silty, 3 scoops of nutty mix, handful of boilies, perfect. They showed and they showed and they showed, and I did not a beep. And I couldn't believe it. I was pulling my hair out. I thought, how can you not get a bite? And I waited and I waited and I waited till first light, and I waited through first light. One of the rods, the second one I'd put out, I kept moving. I started seeing fish out in the open water, so that one came in and that was cast at them. But one of the snag rods, the one that I thought was the main one, stayed where it was the whole time. I was moving the other rods about. And I'd had nothing, you know, by sort of breakfast time, I'd had nothing. The showing had slowed right down. And I was thinking, I've sort of blown it here a little bit. Couldn't figure out why. And eventually I thought, I'm going to do now what I should have done to start with. I should have risked spooking the fish. I should have gone out there while I've got the visibility and had a proper look. So I got in the boat, wound all the rods in, got in the boat, taken a rod with me, gone over there. There's a snag here and a snag here, and you can get to the bank in between safely. You know, there's quite a big gap between them, and there's plenty of room there to play a fish out. As I got in there and looked, I thought, oh, I can see the spot. You know, I can see exactly where they've been feeding. They haven't been feeding down there in the silt. There's this bit there, just this little patch of yellow with them little white stones that have been sucked in and blown out. It's absolutely 100% where they feed. So I scooted along the snags and I found another one further along. And I just thought, oh God, if I'd have done that yesterday, 100% I'd have got bites on both rods, without a shadow of a doubt. I thought it might not be too late. And then I see 2 fish come in front of the boat and go into the snag. I thought, well, there's still some about, you know. So one on that one, particles, boilies, chopped boilies, just not a lot. Because I knew that's where they'd go to feed. I didn't need to draw them in, but a little baited trap on each one. Set the rods up and settled in, you know, for the day. I was half expecting a bite in the day, to be honest. Some of those snag swims, you know, even if you're on a lake where the classic bite time is always like midnight till 5 in the morning, snags are different, you know. If you're going to get a bite in the day, it's either going to be in a thick weed bed or up against it, or in a snag. So I was quite confident throughout the day, and sometime in the day I had my first indication. Well, I've just had my first indication of any description since we started. That right hand rod just had quite a hefty liner. Absolutely shit myself. Heart still pumping. As it happens, throughout the afternoon I had a couple more indications on the left hand rod. I should have paid a little bit more attention. I was sat right on the rods, but I was just thinking they were liners. But as it transpired, it wasn't like that. When I eventually, before I wound in, I went out there to check, you know, after they'd been out there. So what was this? They'd been out there all night. Yeah, that was the second morning. So I left it. I didn't have a bite all night on that particular rod. I was lucky. I had a fish in the open water, just creeping into light, which was good, but it didn't solve the problem of why I couldn't get a bite out of the snags. But I did have a fish like just before first light out in the open water. Morning all. Well, it's obscenely early, but we've just got a carp. Haha. Things are definitely looking up. Still not a lot going on Bosch wise, but nothing showing going over. But I caught one. Not a big one. Common, about £20. I was sound asleep. Oh, I'm half awake now. And then rudely awakened by a roaring bite alarm. Here he is. Just a very angry little common. Stay still. Behave. This got something, eh? It's a lovely morning out there. And I'm holding a carp, so all is good with the world. Nice. A bit shadowy, early morning sun coming out, but sure you get the gist. Lovely little fish. So it was nice to have something on the bank, you know. At least I hadn't blanked. I'd had some sort of a result, but this was driving me bananas, these fish in the snags, why I hadn't had a bite. Yeah, especially the second time round, where I knew I was presented absolutely perfectly. I weren't so sure about the right hand rod. I couldn't see that as clearly. I wasn't 100% sure, but the left hand rod there was absolutely nailed on. You know, that was going to get a bite. Anyway, I've gone out there for a check, left it as it was and just followed the line and gone out there to the spot. As soon as I saw the spot, it was like this. There wasn't a grain of hemp left on it. There wasn't a piece of maize, not a boilie, not a crumb. So I've backed off, got my landing net pole, it's not very deep, snagged the line and just lifted the line without moving the lead and followed it down to see where on earth my hook bait was. As I've lifted it up, it's 3 foot short of the spot. The spot's I didn't notice it at the time, but the spot's a bit of a slope, and I was on this very clean. It's only a little bit of a slope, but obviously what the fish have done, they've tail swiped it or flanked in it or whatever, and my lead's just slid enough to come off the spot and drop into the poo this side of it. It was the only bait in that part of the swim. I just thought, what have I got to do? By now I'd seen enough fish to know that I wasn't fishing for monsters, but they were annoying me now. You know, it was like a group of 20s, mid-20s. They'd annoyed me. I had to get even with them. I really did. So although I only had probably, 2 hours of the session left, I thought I'm going to redo them. You know, there was blatantly next to nothing left. The bulk of the fish had gone, but I was convinced there'd still be a couple in and around the snags. I think I'd seen one that morning in the right hand snag and nothing in the left hand snag. But anyway, I went and redone them and just left them out there, you know, locked up while I'm packing up all my gear as slowly as I possibly could. I had to go. And at the last minute, you know, I had nothing left to do but wind the rods in. I think I was just zipping the camera stuff away. I'd had that trained on the rods the whole time, and I was just zipping that away, and I heard beep, beep. Now 2 beeps when you're snag fishing, that's enough. And I've turned around and the right hand rod, the tip's just whopped right round, and I've hit into it and played this fish to the bank. It was very obliging. It came straight out of the snags to mid-channel. I played it up the middle of the channel and netted it, and it was as expected, you know, sort of a I don't know, somewhere between 18 and 22 pound, that sort of size. Beautiful fish though, absolutely lovely fish. I didn't get much. I've got a bit of video of it, which I will show you. I didn't get a lot of video of it because unfortunately I shuffled closer to the camera to get a better thing and forgot to reset the focus. So there's a short video which you can see here. Well, I'm back. I was literally just packing up. I got half the stuff packed away, just started to load the boat. I brought in one of the rods, I've got 2 out, 2 beeps from the snag rod, tip whipped round, and I caught one. So I actually feel like I've achieved something now, I've succeeded. Managed to outwit the crafty snag feeders. He's not the biggest, but he is the most beautiful. Is he lovely or is he lovely? Let's have a sip of tea. Like my mug, by the way. Padwire mug. Paddy on the front, Paddy's arse on the back. Little Georgia made me that at one of her camps one year. Yeah, so after sessions like that, just makes me realise the sort of fine lines between success and failure when you can see what's happened. But you can't always see what's happened, can you? On this particular occasion, I could see fish showing, knew I had to try harder, found a spot, could see that the spot had been turned over, so I knew that they were winning. But when you're just fishing out there, you know, blind in open water, and there appears to be nothing going on, you know, how often is that close to success and you've got something very slightly wrong? The boilie on the point of the hook, you know, the lead on a slope, been wiped out, been tail swiped off the spot, or a little line has dragged it off the spot, or whatever. You know, there's a multitude of things that can go wrong that you don't know anything about. So a blank session doesn't always mean that you weren't on them or they weren't feeding. They might have been doing both, you know, but you just didn't quite get it right. You just got to keep trying, haven't you, until you get them sessions when you do get it right. And you've got a great big leather in the net, or fully scaled, or a common, or a mirror, or whatever, you know, and they're the sessions you put down to, oh, they were feeding really well that week, must be the moon, must be the wind, must be the pressure. But they might have been feeding just as well on your last blank. You just didn't quite hit the cross, as it were. But anyway, hopefully I'll hit the cross on my next trip, which will be in 2 days' time. What is it today? Thursday. I've got to launch my site on Saturday. Monday I'm going, actually, yeah. So 4 days' time. The weather's looking like it's going to be cooking, which isn't really the best, is it? But I'll top up my suntan if nothing else. But anyway, I'm going to go because it's absolutely melting up here. You can probably see me sweating profusely. It really, really is hot up here today. It's going to be even worse tomorrow. I reckon it's going to hit 30 degrees tomorrow, which is, it's all right if you're out there in the garden with a gin and tonic, but when you're sat in an attic, it's not too healthy. So anyway, I'm going to go, and until next time, ta-da.